What I've come to realize in my 20 years experience as a therapist, nearly 15 years of being a mum, and 40 whatever years of being on this planet, is that there's a single capacity that makes all the difference. It is that skill that makes us available to learn and to interact with this world and the people in it. And that capacity is self-regulation. It's a fancy word, and you might not have heard about it before. But what it means is it refers to a set of skills that allows us to regulate our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. What's important to know is that that is a skill that develops over time and really into adulthood. And it refers to our capacity to modulate three things. For children especially, when we're talking about children, what we'd like them to do is to be able to modulate their bodies, to regulate what is going on inside their bodies, and also to regulate what's coming in from outside through all their senses, because that causes them to be either very excited or it can cause them to be sluggish. But they need to be in a place where they're just right. Right for learning, right for development, and right to interact with the people and the things in this world. They also need to be able to modulate their feelings. We know that children with developing brains can become easily overwhelmed by big feelings. Those feelings can be feelings of excitement, of joy, of frustration, of anger, of stress, and of anxiety. And we need to help them, as they develop, to regulate those big overwhelming feelings so that it doesn't take over their behavior and their bodies and their thinking. The third capacity and the third component of self-regulation is that of modulating your thinking. And that really happens much later. And what we need to do here is we need to help our children to develop what we call executive skills. Those are the skills that they need to sustain attention. It refers to skills such as working memory and self-control. Research tells us that a child with self-regulation skills is able to sustain attention, to control their emotions, and manage their behavior. So let's look at this skill, this capacity called self-regulation in more depth. It might be useful when you describe what self-regulation is by looking at what it's not. It is definitely not self-control, although self-control is part of self-regulation. It's not the child being quiet or the child complying. It's much more than that. So let's look at self-control. Self-control is an important skill and often used to assess whether a child is ready for school or not when we do those school readiness assessments. When children are able to control their actions and their thoughts, they are able to enter the formal school situation. Self-control is sort of like a muscle, as having an internal strength to resist an impulse. And that is a skill that's very much happening in the frontal part of the brain, in the higher cognitive areas of the brain. But self-regulation, that ability to regulate our bodies and our feelings and our thoughts, happens at a much deeper level of the brain. A common mistake is also to confuse self-regulation with compliance and a child that's just being quiet. A child might behave the way we want them to behave because they're being afraid of being punished or not to receive an award. But self-regulation has nothing to do with being strong or weak or resisting that impulse, which we spoke about in self-control, or resisting the impulse because you're going to get into trouble. It's not just a matter of a child getting in control of his negative emotions and his negative actions. It's a mature ability that enables the child to be able to cope with greater and greater challenges. And it also involves arousal states, which we'll speak more about, emotions and behavior, and as the child then grows up, his thinking skills as well. So really, in simple terms, self-regulation can be defined as the ability to stay calmly focused and attentive, which often involves but isn't reduced to self-control. A child who's showing the capacity for self-regulation is easy to spot. We can see it in their bodies. We can see that they breathe deeply and that they breathe easily. We often see that children that's under stress and is suffering from anxiety tends to have shallow breathing. With a child that's relaxed and calm and attentive and able to focus on his learning and his environment, they are able to breathe deeply and rhythmically. We can also see that they're visually orientating to either the environment or to the people in the environment, and their body is organized. Their shoulders are dropped, and they're showing good posture and motor planning. In terms of the emotional cues, we can see that these children are connected and they're available and they're ready to interact and to engage with the world. We always also see on a cognitive level that they're alert and that they're able to process language, because we know that the processing of language comes when the child's thinking brain, the top part of his brain, is activated. And it's when a child is in that state that they are able to learn and to be well regulated. Some recent research is also showing us that self-regulation is ranked as one of the most important characteristics necessary for school readiness. And there is evidence that early self-regulation have stronger associations with success later in life than IQ or academic performance. So really, this is what we'd like to see in our developing children. And children who are able to self-regulate are able to manage their mood and to manage stress. They're able to attend and concentrate, they're able to make friends and feel empathy and develop higher virtues and values. But now you might ask, but what happens if children aren't self-regulated? And who are the children that's at risk for developing difficulties with self-regulation? These children are children that struggle with developing good sleeping habits, either falling asleep or staying asleep. We see that children with self-regulation difficulties often have feeding problems. They may become hungry at irregular times. They may have difficulties with mood regulation and often have severe difficulties managing transitions and changes in routine. And the smallest change in the routine can cause a complete overreaction. When reviewing the literature, children with early features of self-regulation difficulties are at high risk for developing long-term emotional and developmental problems. Many kids have difficulties with self-regulation, which could be related to many factors, including genetic predisposition and temperament. Some children just have more innate self-regulation capacities, and it comes more naturally to them. Others are more highly strung and difficult to soothe. We also see that children with self-regulation difficulties often have underlying sensory processing disorders. They might struggle and suffer from poor attachment, parental neglect and trauma, and neurological disorders such as ADHD and autism, and special education needs and even giftedness. So now that we've looked at what self-regulation is and what it isn't, let's discuss the core concepts of self-regulation, the fact that it's a developmental phenomenon, and how you as parent can promote this very critical skill in your daily activities with your children. There's 3 things that I'd like you to keep in mind when we are thinking about developing this important skill called self-regulation. Firstly, we need to remember that self-regulation develops within a relationship. It develops with age, and some children just need more practice. Bruce Perry said it beautifully. He said, "Developing and maintaining self-regulation is a lifelong process. Its roots begin with the external regulation from a caring parent, and its healthy growth depends on a child's experience and the maturation of the brain." And it makes me think of us as parents being given these little children. It's quite similar to putting a seed in the ground and waiting for that seed to then form the foundations and the roots, and then to grow up and become a strong, beautiful tree. And this is exactly what self-regulation is about. It develops within a caring relationship, it develops with age, And some children just need more practice, just like some plants might need more water or less water, or more sunlight or less sunlight. We are all hardwired for connections and for relationships. And every time that you as caregiver respond to your baby in an appropriate way, so your baby cries and you respond and you go to your baby and you try and see, why is my baby crying? Your baby looks at you and it coos, and you look back at your baby and you coo back at your baby. Your baby points to something. You look at what your baby is pointing and you acknowledge and you say, yes, my darling, I see. You're seeing that there's an aeroplane. Every time when that beautiful interaction happens, there's pathways that's established in your baby's brain, and they develop self-regulation. They start knowing that relationships make them feel good, and they start knowing what it feels like to be calm. So I am upset because I've got a dirty nappy. Mummy picks me up and she changes my nappy. Now I don't feel uncomfortable anymore, and this is what it feels like to feel calm, and there was somebody that helped me to get to calm. So with time, your baby learns very important self-regulation strategies, and it's that relationship between you and your child that lies the foundation for self-regulation. When we are consistently and repeatedly emotionally responsive to our children, especially in moments of stress and dysregulation, then they will learn self-regulation and how to get back to that place of feeling just right, to managing their big overwhelming feelings, and to be in an optimal level or a just right state of arousal so that they can learn and develop. But now you may ask, how is it possible to stay attuned and consistent and calm as a caregiver and as a mother all of the time? Sometimes we get it wrong, and sometimes we just aren't available. No parent can achieve the ideal in every circumstance. I need you to hear this. Some children are just more difficult to soothe than others, or your baby's ability to signal might be unclearer than other babies or even the siblings that you've had. But research tells us that frequent successful connections, so those times when you do get it right, will lay the foundation for self-regulation to develop. And then there's the environmental factors that might cause dysregulation, such as poverty or trauma or stress. There's a wonderful large-scale experiment conducted by Clancy Blair that followed 1,200 infants from birth. What Clancy Blair did is she measured the cortisol levels in reaction to a stressful stimulation, because we know what stress and trauma does to our bodies and to our brains. When stress is activated, cortisol, which is the stress hormone, is being released. So she looked at the environmental factors and the effect of the environment on the child's cortisol levels. And what she saw is that obviously the cortisol levels rose, and it had a big effect on the children's brains, but only when their mothers were inattentive or unresponsive. When mothers were responsive and able to calm those children down, the effects of the cortisol in their brains almost disappeared. So that gives us a lot of hope. We know that when we are able to help all of our children overcome stress and anxiety and trauma, that it will not have a lasting effect on their brains. So let's have a look at the second element of self-regulation, the fact that it develops with age. As children develop and as they mature, they develop regular cycles of alertness, attentiveness, emotional states, and activity level. Babies learn how to self-calm by putting their hands in their mouth, by rocking, by looking at mum's face or an external object like a mobile. As they develop, they start to establish regular sleep and wake cycles, and they're able then to tolerate change and transitions. Self-regulation takes a long time to develop, and even until the early adulthood, and we know that it's directly related to brain maturation. Children learn the foundation for self-regulation in the first 5 years of life, and that's why we as parents play a very important role in developing this critical skill. In the first 3 months, most of the baby's self-regulation happens through what we call external regulation. The parent or the loving caregiver, whether that's a daycare mother or a granny, provides the regulation and helps the baby to recover from periods of stress and dysregulation by picking them up, by using sensory information, by touching them, by using their voice, cooing noises, or singing to your baby. And it's you, the adult, the parent or the loving caregiver, who is the container and the holder of the sensations and your baby's regulation. Then, between 4 and 24 months, we are able to then allow the baby to do and to practice more self-regulation. And that's when we become a co-regulator. We don't expect the baby and the young child and the young toddler to do it completely independently, and that's where we often may be asking too much of our children during their time from 4 to 24 months, especially coming up to 2 years. Because really at this stage, our baby still needs us to help them to co-regulate. Then we see from 24 months until 36 months, so coming up to 3 years, that the child is assuming greater capacities for self-regulation. Infants begin to regulate arousal levels and sensory motor responses even in the womb space, even long before birth. We are able to see that they move through arousal levels, through sleeping, being awake, being active awake. For those of you who've been pregnant, you might remember that during the day you don't really feel your baby, and then as soon as you lie down to have a nap, suddenly your baby starts kicking. It's because the rocking motions of the amniotic fluid while you're moving about, doing your activities during the day, is lulling the baby to sleep. But then when you go and lie down, your baby will wake up and start kicking. So we see even in the womb space that babies are developing that early biological regulation of regulating arousal levels. But then bam, the babies are born into the sensory rich world. And now they not only have to make sense of what happens inside their bodies, but also they need to make sense of all the visual, auditory, tactile and movement stimulation that is part of the sensory rich world that we're living in. And we cannot expect a baby as young as 3 months to do that independently yet. We as caregivers, we soothe them and we help them through sensory experiences to experience what it feels like to be calm. As babies then develop and grow, and as they develop physically, they then develop the motor skills to become more active in their self-regulation. They are then able to put their hands to their mouth and suck when they're becoming dysregulated. They can start looking away from the mobile toy that you've put in front of them or your face, because that visual input might be too overstimulating. And later on, if babies are able to sit and to crawl, they can actually then become very active in regulating and distracting them from this sensory responses or the sensory stimulation that's overwhelming their systems. But it's important that we remember that all of this early self-regulation develops within the context of a consistent and a caring relationship. From 4 months to 24 months, as we've said, the baby is increasingly gaining more motor skills to take certain conscious actions. They're able to distract from a stimulus that's overwhelming them. They can walk away, they can crawl away, and they can look away from overstimulating stimuli. Let's think of the toddler who's able to bounce down from your knee, crawl to explore the environment, get to a place where they might be a little bit unsure what to do here, then just look at you and you can give them the yes, it's okay, and then they can explore further. That developmental activity is something that is happening because the child from an early age was able to attune to your cues as parents. And that just looking at them might give them enough of an indication that it's okay, that they can go ahead, or no, it's not okay, it's unsafe, they might have to come back. Toddlers who struggle with motor planning or might have difficulties with secure attachments and to develop that attunement between themselves and an adult might find these developmental milestones difficult to reach, which then impacts on their self-regulation at a later stage. By age 4, we see that children are able to use more complex regulatory strategies. They can now start putting the brakes on. It's this time when they know that it might be okay to clap hands when we're all busy playing outside, but when the teacher or when mummy's talking, then we don't clap hands. Just think about the time when your toddler is grabbing the toy from somebody else, from another friend that they're playing with. We need to remember that grabbing results not because the child cannot have the capacity to control his actions. So we need to realize in that point in time, your child's brain is overflooding with big feelings. They're looking at us for how to make sense of this big overwhelming feelings, because if we don't help them, those big overwhelming feelings can easily go into their bodies and into their thinking, and they can grab that toy or take another toy and smash the child over the head. So I always say that it's good in those situations, and in any situations where you see that your child is becoming dysregulated, to do the ABC. A standing for acknowledgement. First of all, if we acknowledge that our child is not behaving the way he's behaving because he is deliberately doing it, if it's coming from a place that because their brains are being overwhelmed, then we're acknowledging their feelings. We're not saying that it's okay to feel frustrated and to grab the toy and to be angry, but we're saying that I can understand that you're feeling this way. So you acknowledge the feeling and you say to the child, Mommy can see that you're disappointed. Mommy can see that you're frustrated because you really wanted to build a high tower and then somebody came and smashed it down. You don't have to use all that language. But the point is, with our bodies, by going down on our knees and by looking our child in their eye, we are acknowledging and we're saying to them that I can see that what you're doing now is coming from a place of frustration or disappointment or anger or shame or whatever the case might be. So try and put a name to the feeling. Mommy can see that you're disappointed, or Mommy can see that you're angry. But then we go on to B and we put the boundary in place and we say, but it's not okay to hit, and it's not okay to grab. It's not okay to kick. It's not okay to bite. In this house, we do not hit or talk that way. And then we can follow it up by giving them a choice. And often children might know and might see when you're talking to them that the response that they had was not the right response, but they just don't know what else to do. So by giving them a choice, we're opening up their thinking part of the brain, and they can then rectify that behavior. So we could say something like, we do not grab. So you've got a choice in this matter. Either you can wait so that Johnny can finish playing with the train and then it's your turn, or we can go and play with another train, or we can find another car that you want to play with. So ideally, try and give them a choice between two activities or two behaviors that is appropriate for the situation. We've also said that self-regulation, that when it comes to development, that some children just need more practice. We know that some children, as I've said in the introduction, have a temperament that tends to be more highly strung, and they have difficulties with bringing themselves to a place of where they're calm and alert. So the implications for us as parents when it comes to the development of self-regulation is to remember that it develops within a relationship with this child. And only when the child feels a sense of belonging and safe within the relationship and within the environment, they will then be able to develop this very important capacity. Secondly, we need to remember that it takes a long time to develop, and punishing our children for failing to be calm and attentive for longer than a few minutes, or to fail calming themselves down after frustration, does nothing to help them to develop the capacity of self-regulation. Likewise, failing to provide opportunities to develop self-regulation will hinder their growth. So we need to find a way or a place in between these two extremes for our children to develop self-regulation. And then we also said that some children need more practice. So what can we do at home? It's important to be fully present. We know that our children look at us and that the relationship is important. And if we are fully present, we are able to tune into our child's needs and able to form a strong, secure bond. Also, when our children are separated from us and then we meet again, those first 5 minutes after being separated is a very good time to just be fully present. So put your phone down, leave the lunch, you can do that a little bit later, or the dinner, but just make sure during those first 5 minutes after when we reconnect that we are fully present. Watch carefully, wait for our children and listen to what they are telling us. Provide a predictable routine and structure, because that is what help children to feel safe and to feel a sense of belonging. Be consistent as much as you can within that structure and that routine. And then anticipate transitions and changes by providing children ample opportunities or ample warning that things are going to change. Some children might even need a visual schedule or little pictures being drawn out and saying, today, Mummy is not going to come and pick you up from nursery, but Granny is, and maybe draw a picture of Granny or show a picture of Granny, because by showing them that visual input, it helps them to feel safe and to make that connection. Show empathy, even though we can't understand why we need to throw our toys out of the cot if your block tower crashes down. Some of those experiences that we think our children are completely overreacting, have empathy and remember that we are talking about a small child, a developing brain, and big feelings that are causing lots of over-responsiveness and are putting them in a place where they're feeling dysregulated. Talk about feelings. Talk about how it feels to feel sad, to feel happy, to feel glad, to feel excited, to feel joy, to feel delight, to feel disappointment and anger, and build a vocabulary and a safe place where it's okay to feel sad and it's okay to feel angry. Because if we give our children opportunities to vocalize and to experience those feelings without feeling that they are being judged, it puts us in a place where we can start talking about ways to manage those feelings and provide an environment and activities that are conducive to self-regulation. And we know often that for our children to self-regulate, movement is one of the key elements. And so make sure that there's time in your day to get them off the couch, to get them on their bike. Make times to rough and tumble. Make time during the day where we can tickle, where we can play hide and seek games. And then also make time for yourself. Make sure that you as role model and that you as container of these children and our children and their big overwhelming feelings, their developing bodies and brains, that for us to provide a strong container, that we make sure that we look at our self-regulation capacities as well. Know your own temperament. Make sure that you find activities that regulate you. So if we can come from a place where we are well regulated, then we can be that safe, comforting container for our children to develop this very important skill called self-regulation.